We're covering the three most common questions we get. We're not going to cover any SEI, CIS or legal stuff. I won't be talking any of that, which means actually, technically, I'm probably not wearing much of a founder catalyst hat. I am going to be wearing my hat as an angel investor, as well as seeing, thousands of funding rounds. Lots go well and some don't. So I'm distilling the learnings from that, I guess. This is going to be a bit more raw and honest than the others as well. You can't be that honest about SEI, CIS and legals. This is going to be, my opinion. And as a change here, we're doing two things differently. Firstly, we are going to raise the three questions, and I'll come on to those in a minute. We're going to answer one question, go to Q&A, have another question, and And that's because I think they're in kind of three distinct but adjacent points, which is fun. The second point, I've got 6 tips littered throughout this presentation that I'm going to go ad lib, which is always dangerous. But I've got 6 kind of key points that I wish all of you knew. I wish every founder, every founder that starts to raise, I wish they knew these 6 points. So I'll be bringing those to life throughout the presentation. This may go well or not, but we'll see. It's going to be fun either way. So the 3 questions, let's cover those. How to find investors, that is question number 1. We're always asked how investors will evaluate your startup. And this is very, very, very personal. So I'm going to tell you how I evaluate your startup. And I've litmus tested this against a few other investors, quite a few other investors, and it's kind of been polished, but this is my view rather than a general view potentially. And then we'll talk about the really, really thorny issue of valuation, which is the most, is probably the most contentious debate between founders and investors. So let's go. I'm going to do an intro first. Apologies if you've watched all 3 of these. You're going to sit through exactly the same thing with probably some variations, but here we go. So I'm Sam. I'm an exited founder, grew a company from 0 to 27 million in just under 4 years, and then exited to private equity, started angel investing, frankly, there's something to do. And then just loved it. I've fallen in love with the entrepreneurial space. Warts and all, there are some problems, and that's why I love working with female founder rise, because they have a mission to work on some of those issues, the massive disparity in funding, but that's a different story. Started angel investing. I've got 32 investments now, $750,000 deployed. So even before starting Founder Catalyst, I'd kind of knew what I was doing. But I started Founder Catalyst because I kept bumping into loads of founders at pitch events who had really great ideas, knew they needed funding, but just had no idea how to close a funding round. They didn't know about SEI, CIS, they didn't know what a term sheet was, they didn't know how to play the game. So I thought, well, I'm going to scratch an itch and do something about that. And Founder Catalyst very much is, you can probably tell, a passion project. I don't do this to earn a living. I don't need to earn a living. I do this because I love supporting founders. And really that drives all of our service. What do we do? Really quick pitch. We've got a whole bunch of free stuff on our website. It's always growing. It's absolutely free. It's written by a lawyer. And it's things that early stage founders need but can't afford to pay for particularly. So loads of free stuff. Take a look. We help people with SEI, CIS, advanced assurance. We've got a ridiculously good track record, best in the industry, I think. We do it for free when you commit to a funding round. We've automated the daylights out of it, and we will check your pitch deck and forecast and everything else to check it's perfect. Third thing we do is legal funding round paperwork. We covered this in the last webinar. I'm sure you've all seen it. But we produce all of the documents you need to close the funding round. We've got a platform. You invite your investors. We securely onboard them. We've got data rooms. We issue share certificates. We do all of that stuff. It's a great platform. I love it. And finally, we make introductions between our customers and potential sources of funding, which is one of the questions today, which is why I'm really glad to be answering. So that's us. 2 things that make us unique. Firstly, we're commercially unique. Everything we do is just £1,500. No monthly fees, no hidden fees, no percentage of the raise. We don't take a percentage of your raise because, frankly, whether you're raising 1.5 million or 150K, we don't have to do anything different. I think it just doesn't sit well to charge you another penny. And secondly, when you're working with us, you're working with exited founders and angel investors, which is really important for me. If you ask us a question, we can give you guidance and support based upon being a founder ourselves in the past and also being investors. We can bring to life both sides. It's mad in the startup space. There are so many people who call themselves fundraising experts, and they're 22-year-olds with a degree in economics. I'm not knocking people who've got a degree in economics, but if you've never built, exited, or invested in anything, I struggle to see how you're an expert in this space. Whew. Anyway, let's get on to the first question. And the first question is around, exactly how you find, the first question is exactly on, let's go back to the start, how to find your investors. And tip number one is making sure you've got your ducks in a row. It's great speaking to investors, and everybody should do it. You've just got to watch your timing. I see so many founders rushing to speak to investors. I had somebody pitch to me the other week who didn't have a pitch deck. They were like, yeah, can we jump on a Zoom and I'll tell you all about what we're doing. I asked for 4 things, and you should make absolutely sure you've got these 4 things before you go. The first is a pitch deck, really, really straightforward. It's table stakes. You must have this. There's a standard flow. There's a standard form. There are some great templates out there. Don't deviate too far from the beaten track. So that one's really, really straightforward. Forecast model, ditto. Yeah, there's nothing much more to say about that. If you haven't got that, you shouldn't be speaking to investors, because honestly, you won't know how much you need to raise. The third is a term sheet, which is a little more esoteric, but you can create a term sheet on Founder Catalyst within 10 minutes. You know, it will take you 10 minutes to onboard, create a free term sheet, and then you're ready to go. And the term sheet summarizes the offer you have to your investors. What are they investing in? What's the valuation? What rights and protections you're offering? What does the cap table look like? So you can create one if you're, yeah, it's really straightforward. And the fourth and final thing is SEIS and EIS, advance assurance. If you haven't got that, then investors have no certainty that any investment they make is going to benefit from those tax reliefs. So it's really, really important to get that in place. If you haven't got one of those 4 documents, then I'll tell you what I think as an investor. I just don't think you're serious about a funding round. If you haven't got those 4 documents, I'll be like, well, you're not really intentional about a funding round. All of these things you can tick off relatively quickly. And if you haven't got one of them, you're just not looking prepared. So it's not a great look. And even if investors don't say it to you, they'll be like, okay. So that is the first tip before you even go and speak to an investor.
I love that honest advice. I love that honest advice, though, Sam, that even if people don't say it, that's what they're thinking. So yeah. You've got to go with your best foot forward.
Yeah, and this is littered with my brain dump on what I'm actually thinking when I see certain things. And it is, yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. But hopefully every one of these tips gives you really actionable advice. So it's things that you can fold into your funding raising strategy. So anybody who has seen one of the other presentations, I think it was SEIS actually, has seen this diagram. And I'm going to use this to talk through the options and throw in a few curveballs as well. But broadly, this is the equity investment space in the UK. You can fund it yourself. You can ask mum and dad and family and friends. You can ask angels. You can ask groups of angels. You can ask crowdfunders, which is big groups of angels. You can ask some SEIS funds, more on those in a minute. Strategic investors and VCs who don't make use of SEIS and EIS as well. I'm assuming, based upon lots of the things you said at the start, Emmy, everybody here is going to be, you know, first, second, third funding round, which puts you neatly into, you know, maybe you can take some money from family and friends all the way around to SEIS and EIS funds. You're probably not in the last 2. And if you are, you might want to drop off now. So for me, I tell you what optimal is. If I were a founder, I am a founder of Founder Catalyst, but that's a different story. But if I was the founder out looking for investment today, I will tell you exactly where I would go first. And it's like the Goldilocks thing, right? It's too hot, too cold, just perfect. So the problem with speaking to lots of angels is, I think one of my contacts told me this week that there are, you know, over 200,000 angels in the UK. So somebody has scraped all the company's house. This is Scribe Labs, by the way, who I absolutely love. Somebody has scraped company's house and they've found that there are, I think it was 170,000 odd angels in the UK, which is amazing. How do you find them? How do you speak to them? It's really time consuming. Only 1 in 20 conversations or pitches would lead to an investment. So in theory, it's great. And I know lots of founders that raise via this. It wouldn't be the first place I would go. But absolutely, if you fancy rolling up your sleeves, use something like Meet Alfred, maybe. Other tools are available to automate LinkedIn and, you know, go and send lots of annoying messages to investors. Use Scribe Labs to do something in a much more tailored way based upon a better data set potentially, and so on. There are ways of finding angels. There are ways of reaching out. But it's a hard slog. It is probably heartbreaking. You're going to need to speak to hundreds of people. It would not be my first choice at all. You then move around a bit to crowdfunding and there are 2 challenges that I'll bring to life with crowdfunding. I could probably think of more, but let's start with 2. The first problem is that in order to do a crowdfunding, you need to take a certain percentage of you need to have a certain amount of your equity already committed. So if you're doing a 300K funding round on crowdfunding, a 300K raising total, you need at least 50% of your round already committed. And actually that's increased. I've heard 70, 80% be mentioned. So you need to do the majority of your funding round before you even speak to the crowdfunders. Here's a tip, by the way, both the crowdfunders will try and take their fee covering the 70 or 80% you already take to them. They will both buckle if you say, absolutely not, we're not paying you a fee for investors you haven't found. So that's a good tip. There is another tip, which is actually don't tell them you're raising 300K, tell them you're raising 200K, and then you can overfund potentially to the £300,000. So I think crowdfunding is great for certain businesses. So if you've got a consumer-based product, BrewDog do really well. Everybody loves beer, with exceptions, and they do really well because everybody can understand beer and everybody wants to buy into a bit of BrewDog. If you've got a deep tech doing some quantum computing stuff, you're probably not a great fit for crowdfunding, I'll be honest. But crowdfunding has its place for those kind of direct-to-consumer type goods, and I'm not looking into it. I think they're a great asset to the space. We then come on to the SEIS and EIS funds, and I'm going to pick my words carefully here. They wouldn't be the first place that I would go to as a founder. Predominantly that is because, and this sounds like a weird answer, but let me explain. They are sophisticated investors. So they know their job is to invest on behalf of other people, and they absolutely know how to play the game. So the terms you get from those SEIS and EIS funds are going to be the most founder unfriendly out of all of these. They are going to be very investor friendly. They're protecting, and I can understand why, they're protecting the investment from their investors. But the terms you get are going to be harsh. They really know how to play the game. And in some cases the terms are let's put it this way. I've got an article called Toxic Term Sheets, and it talks specifically about those kind of investors. I'm not tarring all SEIS and EIS funds with the same brush, but it wouldn't be the first place I would go. For me, the sweet spot is actually the angel networks. Let me explain. So there are 130 angel networks in the UK. There are some that are sector specific, so Green Angel Syndicate, Science Angel Syndicate. I love them both. And they are, well, the hints in the name, but they invest in very specific niches. And there are more. There's, an AI group coming out I'm aware of, and there's a few others. And then there's geographically specific syndicates as well. So angel syndicates, private equity club, angel networks, I'm talking about the same thing here. The reason I love those, firstly, compared with angels, you're not pitching quite so many times. So there's 130 groups. You should have to pitch to maybe half a dozen of these and close your funding round. So rather than pitching to hundreds of angels individually, you're pitching half a dozen times, hopefully, as long as you've got all your ducks in a row and as long as there's nothing amiss with your proposition. The other benefit is the terms you get from an angel network will be relatively fair. So they're not as exploitative as some of the SEIS, EIS funds. They'll be a little more punchy than angels because angel networks typically know how to play the game, but the terms will be somewhere in the middle there. And this is a trade-off between time and cost. So you will almost certainly raise your funding round faster by using an angel network. In return, they'll take a fee. So every angel network, with a few exceptions, will take 5 to 7% is market standard. It's not unusual. And as a founder, if I were trading off time and cost, I would happily pay 5% to get the money in the bank and to start growing the business rather than spend the next 4 months raising. There are some exceptions. There's a lovely group who they love seeing underrepresented founders. Milton Keynes Investor Group. So sorry, Georgina, your inbox is going to get flooded after this, but I really love that group. It's a not-for-profit. They just invest for all the right reasons. So make sure you say hello to Georgina if you contact. So yeah, in terms of where I would go for funding, that would be it. There are a few things that sit around. I would have updated the slide, but I haven't. But there are a few things that sit around this ecosystem, if you like. So one of those are some really useful platforms that will allow you to access investors in the community. And there is no guarantee of success with a couple of these. Well, there's no guarantee of success with any of these, but they're not pay to play. So there is, for example, a platform called UKBAA Dealshare. Shout out to Rod and the team at UKBAA. They've got a platform called DealShare. I love it for a couple of reasons. So firstly, it's free for founders. You can put your pitch up there. You can put all of your details. It gets you in front of the 15,000 or whatever UK BAA members. So it's really useful. You're going to spend a bit of time creating a profile, but off you go. Barclays Eagle Lab also has something similar, which is great. So I think those are, it's a no-brainer. Join those platforms. Why wouldn't you? They're free. There's no reason not to. Now, they don't always work, and yeah, it's a very mixed bag, but on the basis it's free, it doesn't really matter. As I mentioned, there are automation tools. I've called out a couple, Scribe Labs and Meet Alfred and things like that. So you should absolutely be building those into your investor outreach. You can go to a broker. So a broker or an introducer, as some of them like to be called, are people who will, for a very small upfront fee, hopefully they'll take a small fee to onboard you. They will use their little black book, their network, to make some introductions that you potentially couldn't make. They know investors who have particular preferences for particular things. They are very good at introducing you to the right people rather than scattergun, and they will take a percentage of your raise as well. There are other online platforms. I'm not going to name them. We've got a slide coming up on these actually, but I have a very mixed view of these. And lots of our founders, we've got a WhatsApp group with 250 odd people on now, and we get very mixed reviews. Some people have used these networks with positive reviews. Others say it's just an opportunity to fleece you for fees, and we've never had any joy. So your mileage may vary. Like I say, the only other thing to say on this slide, and I'll repeat what I've said before, if it were me, I'd be getting to angel networks. Absolutely, for sure. There is one decision point I'd like to bring to life before I jump onto the next slide, and that is around active versus passive investors. So if you want active investors who roll up their sleeves, they can make the introductions to suppliers, customers, partners, whatever it is, then you want an active investor, and they are more predominantly sitting in the angels and angel networks. Otherwise you may just want passive cash. You may just want a couple of $100,000 and never to hear from your investors. And that lends itself more to the further you go around this diagram, for example. That's all I wanted to say on this slide. Here we go. Another hot tip. Lots of founders, they get discouraged by the negatives and the no's, and they think, I'm getting lots of no's, and there's one thing you need to know, which is you don't need to impress all investors. If on the basis that Robert Scribe, 250,000 individual investors, that's great. There's 250,000 individual investors, and I'll let you into a secret from an investor point of view. There is no single proposition out there that will impress every investor, or even a significant chunk, because there are investors who won't touch B2B or won't touch B2C. Well, there you go. That's kind of 50-50 there. There are some who only invest in certain sectors. There are some who have a preference around traction. There are some who only invest at a certain valuation. There are some who only invest if you've got two co-founders exactly. If you're a sole founder, or if you've got 10 founders, there are some investors who won't invest. There are some people who will only invest if you are an exited founder. There are 0 businesses in the UK, I guarantee you, that will attract 100% of investors. And you don't need 100%. There are 270,000 investors in the UK. You need to find your investors. And depending on what you're raising, you probably need, 10, 20 investors. So don't get disheartened. Don't think that, I'm a solo founder, nobody's going to invest in me. I invest in solo founders all the time. I don't care, even though it's not best practice if you listen to the kind of investor schools. I do, because for me, I don't really care. And we'll come on to more later around, that thought process that investors will go through. But do not get disheartened. There are so many investors out there. You don't need to impress them all. Your investors will be out there for sure. We jump straight into tip 3, and I'm not going to dive into this too much, but I am going to give you a pointer. So a lemon market, Daniel Sorko, shout out to Daniel from ShipShape. He's got a VC search engine, and it's increasing to a broader search engine where you can type in what your business does, and it will find investors that have invested in your space. I love it. And Daniel's such a genuinely lovely guy. Please go and take a look. But a lemon market is where effectively you are paying to play. So great, I need to invest in front of your investors. I'll pay $2,000 to do so. And that drives all of the wrong things. It's really, really bad for the founders, because you're paying money up front that you probably don't have, and there's no guarantee of success. that group will absolutely want a percentage of your raise as well. But it's really bad for the investors as well, because the only founders that will pay to play are people that can't get investment from anybody else. So those investors that are part of that lemon market, they're buying from founders that can't get investment from everywhere else, which isn't a great deal for them either. So it's a lose-lose all round, other than for the people that are running the groups. Do take a look. Daniel is much more articulate about that than me. There is also something I'd like to bring to life. I'm not going to name anybody here, but there are some funds in the UK, some SEIS funds specifically, that my heart sinks every time I see them on the cap table. And for me as an investor, and this is completely raw truth, I won't invest in that company because the terms that that group invest in are, they're just painful for me as a follow-on investor. I just won't play that game. But secondly, my heart sinks because I'm like, actually, you're a really high quality founder and you could do better than that. So either you don't understand the market and you haven't done your due diligence, or you just took the first money that's going, which is a really bad look. So absolutely do not jump at the first money you're offered, and be really, really considerate about where you take your money from, because future investors will absolutely judge by that as well.
Can I just ask a quick question? So if you're new to this and you don't know what you don't know, how do you know not to take from that terrible company that you don't want to share? And I understand why you don't want to share that because it's a public space, but like, how would people know? It's just about, I suppose, reaching out to other founders and reaching out to the ecosystem, is it? Or how would they know not to take that investment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, and you don't know what you don't know is an absolutely fair point. And by the way, that is not pointing the finger at an individual fund. There are a few that I think are equally exploitative. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. What
are they doing? Is it what would be like the big? I suppose we've done that before, haven't we? But is there like a big red flag that people should look out for that would maybe signpost that this is a bit of a dodgy fund?
Yeah. So okay. Well, here's a tip. So I have a article on my website which is called Toxic Term Sheets. Well, I'm sure we can share the link after this. That points out the red flags that I look for. So forcing founders to create an option before a funding round, liquidation priorities rather than a liquidation preference, forcing founders to capitalize their director's loan account. If your term sheet looks like that, then that probably isn't the first place I would go for funding. And like I say, I'm not here to name and shame. I just, founders have a choice in the same way those investors have a choice to construct their term sheet in any way they want. They're choosing it to maximize their earnings and their potential, which I understand, but founders have a choice to either accept that or not. And if you do accept it, then you're buying into what is probably a lemon market, and investors like me will judge your startup based upon that. Does that make sense, Emmy?
Yes, that does. That's brilliant. And also, someone's posted the link to the Toxic Term Sheet article, and I'm also sure we covered this in our previous masterclass, so I will share that in the I'll share that again in the email that I send next week.
For sure. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So this is the break between two questions. The next one's about how an investor will evaluate your startup. Should we dive into any questions that are?
Yeah, there are many. So we might have to come back to some of these because I know we've got lots of other topics to continue, but starting from the top, could you list the 4 documents? The big 4 documents that you referenced at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. Pitch deck, forecast, advance assurance, term sheet. Those are the
Amazing.
4.
Okay.
Yeah. And why don't we, I realize we're not going to get around all the questions. You and we should do an Ask Me Anything hour at some point after this. Why don't we do that, and we can mop up anything that founders would have thought about after each of these sessions, maybe.
Exactly. I think that's always a good idea. Do you need to create a term sheet before talking to investors, or would you negotiate terms with your lead investor?
In the absence, yeah. So the one thing that you may struggle to reach, and there's a split view on this, but yeah, other than the valuation, you should be proposing some terms. They don't have to be the terms you end up on, but a founder kind of wants to know what your cap table looks like, what your valuation, how much you're raising, and those, what are the terms you're offering or not. Personally, it's the first thing I ask for. But there are lots of investors out there who aren't quite so sophisticated. So, I realize there are some angels who don't really care. They want to get to know you. They want to understand the proposition. There are things they care about much before the term sheet. Personally, I don't want to waste. Sorry.
I was just saying, I've never asked to see a term sheet in my life as an angel. I don't know if I should have done. But for me, if it's the right, and I'm investing small amounts of money. I'm investing £3,000, you know. So for me, I haven't asked that, but it's a great question. And I suppose you're looking at it from your hat, which is very, you know, you're doing this all day, every day, and you really understand it, don't you? So Sam, you mentioned there's lots of good pitch deck templates out there. Wondering if you could suggest a couple. Where would we find good pitch deck templates?
That is really good. I think we've got a link somewhere. I'll share it after this. I think we've got a link. I think Seeders offer a basic template. People are always posting on LinkedIn and I hoover them up. I love collecting things. So I've got a list of those. Oh yeah, I love this. I love that. I mean, the other answer is as well to look at, you know, there are lots of pitch decks floating around. And there's no perfect pitch deck because every proposition is different. But here is one tip that I haven't added to this, which is try and follow the standard flow for a pitch deck, you know, and you know what that looks like, Emmy. What's the problem? What's the solution? What's the market? What's the competition? What's the team? What's the ask? Broadly. A forecast, you could add that in there. Why not? And the reason why that's important, like if I see a pitch template that either doesn't answer all of those or is in a different format, but I kind of got to readjust my head and it's a little bit annoying. So if you follow, there is a standard flow for a reason. But yeah, I'll send a list after this of what I think are good resources.
Okay, perfect. We've got some in the chat as well, so that's good. What's the best way to line up these funding stages with your startup stages, i.e. pre-product, pre-revenue as angels, prototype as friends and family? Like, is there a way that you can sort of do that?
Yeah, and this changes over time. 2 years ago, it was vastly different. You know, you needed a shiny pitch deck and a bright idea, and you know, you would close 150k, as was SEI's funding round back in the day. Because the market's tightened, and I think, you know, valuations are suppressed, and also, you know, there are more founders out there looking for money. People are looking for more traction. So if you want to do an arm's length angel round and you haven't got any close contacts, people are looking for some kind of traction for lots of reasons, but they will expect you to have done more than produced a pitch deck. They will expect an MVP or some serious market research or whatever. And these days, you know, with Bubble and no code and things like that, there are ways of building an MVP and proving the concept without spending 200k on a product. And I hear, one of the things I hear from founders that's really annoying, I should add that as another tip, maybe next time, is, oh, I need 250k so I can build a product. That's ridiculous. Do never ever say that to a founder, unless you are built to an investor. Unless you're building something ridiculously deep tech. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, you know, I've done an MVP on Bubble myself. It looks ridiculous, but I've proved the flow and I've proved there's a need for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point. Do you recommend platforms such as Angel Investment Network, Flow, etc., to find angels?
No. I think I've alluded to that. The answer is no. And I don't know. Yeah. So the answer is no, because they have very, very, very mixed outcomes. The fees are virtually always up front. So like I say, the place I would go first is the angel networks, and then you can go to the platforms. But the platforms are a very, very mixed bag. We do have some founders, much to my surprise, that have, you know, raised from AIM, but that's an outlier. It's not common.
Right. That's very interesting to know. And where and how can we find those angel networks?
I have an interactive map. It's not mine, I didn't produce it, but I've got a link to it. I will share it. And
the Google one. The Google one.
The Google one, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, I don't know who created that, but it's amazing, isn't it? So, and I'm pretty sure that has most of the angel networks, in fact, throughout Europe and the world. So we will share that. So I'm answering all the Q&A that are coming in the Q&A section, not in the chat, just so everyone knows, because I can't keep track of chat and Q&A. So the next question would be, do you have a recommendation for finding angel networks in the US? Well, I think that map that we talked about has angel networks in the US, so that would probably be the best port of call initially.
By the way, let me stop. Let's stop just there for a second. By going to any other country, you're not using your startup superpower. Your startup superpower is SEIS and EIS. As an investor, I get half my money back. I get no CGT, I get inheritance tax, I get loss relief. Nobody in America is, so they may pay higher valuations, but it's going to be a painful journey, and you're not using your superpower. Sure. If you're going Series A, which I'm assuming they're not, go to America before then. It's in 99% of occasions, it's a bad choice.
Because it's very tax efficient in the UK for investors, so it's a good place to start.
Yep.
Can you share the details of the AI Angel Network and the name of the Angel Network with Georgina?
Yes, Georgina's Milton Keynes Investor Group. Apologies again, Georgina. And the AI one I'll send afterwards.
Yeah. And I think probably the last question, because we need to keep moving, and then we can always come back to these later.
Sure.
What is an appropriate upfront fee to pay a broker? Would they expect to be paid upfront? Is that appropriate, or?
Yeah, and yes, yeah, and you know, we are happy with our fees to explain the point. We are happy to split, a couple of £100 up front, and the rest, we're happy to do stage payments. The reason why I don't start anything ever for free is people don't. It's very rare for people to take seriously something they're getting for free. It just has a different mindset. So if I were a broker, I would expect some money up front, so some token payments so you have skin in the game, because otherwise it's easy not to take it seriously. So £500 or below, I think, is a very reasonable upfront fee, because that person's going to have to get to know you. They're going to help you polish a pitch deck. You are going to get value out of that upfront fee, and then the rest should be completion. I think that's fair.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So somebody's saying if you move your cursor over the window, the Q&A should appear. Okay, perfect. So if it's just because we've got 150 people on here, if we have all the Q&A and the questions, also Sam and I can always come back to these afterwards if they don't get answered, or we can invite you back to a future webinar to get those answered. We want to obviously get as many questions answered as we can. Sam, given timings and your promise of also talking about valuations, should we move on to that and then come back to questions?
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go through how investors will evaluate your startup, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll rattle through this one. The first one, I'm very, very passionate about. Don't get me wrong, I'm passionate about this, but I'm going to give a brain dump and then we'll shift on quickly. Tip number 4, though, before we get into how my brain works, which is terrifying, is the founder needs to try and pass the beer test. So I only invest in people that I would want to go for a beer with afterwards. I never invest in somebody who I'm like, God, I love the idea, and I'm not investing in that. And to give you a really strong example of this, I met a founder who ticks founder bingo for me, other than the beer test. He had an AI startup. It solves a world problem. It's very green as well. The market was huge potential. They developed some technology. Tick, 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 tick. This is investor bingo right there. Amazing. I got on a call with the founder and I just didn't like him. I just could not, I never wanted to talk to him again. Honestly, it was that bad. And so I didn't invest. But everything else, he had a low valuation, he had SEIS, tick, 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 all the way along, just didn't pass the beer test. So do bear in mind that, the investors will they'll be evaluating you as a person as well. And, I can bite my tongue. If I could suffer that founder, then maybe I would have. But how do his customers view him? How are future investors going to view him? And yeah, so I just walked away, and it was interesting to see, actually, despite being what I thought was an amazing business, it fizzled. It didn't go anywhere. I don't think they got funded, and they certainly, they disappeared. Yeah, so there's just, a little tip from me. And no investor's going to tell you that, by the way, but it's really, really important. I am not going to talk you through this because we don't have time. I could talk for an hour just on this. This is my brain dump. But I sat down one day and said, how do I evaluate a startup? And every time I look at a startup, I've double checked that this reflects what I'm really thinking. So it's worth saying, this is my brain dump, not everybody's brain dump. Any vaguely sophisticated angel will be hopefully applying most of this. Any SEIS fund or whatever will absolutely be applying every part of this. They're trying to work out, and everybody will apply it on different ratios. So, for some people, VCs are all about the exit strategy and what can my return on investment. And if you don't hit that return on investment, they'll just walk away. Whereas angels don't really, they want to make, don't get me wrong, they want a 10 times return, but they don't need you to potentially become a unicorn, which is quite often a VC test. I'm not going to talk through all of these. I will share you an article where I do talk through more of this. I will talk through one that is most important to me. So, Emmy, if you were to ask me which are the most 3 important blocks here, I would say team, team, and team. I care all about the team. If the team, and the reason is, if a team's right, You know,
They'll get it. They'll get it. They'll find
yeah.
it.
If the team's right and the idea is slightly wrong, they'll understand, they'll pivot, they'll do something different. If the team's, you know, adequate but not amazing and the idea is perfect, they'll manage to fluff the execution somehow. So honestly, people invest in people, people work with people, and that is no more that, yeah, there is no point more true than that in the startup space. The rest is important. Don't get me wrong. You can't be weak. You can't just say, I don't need to worry about proposition because I've got an amazing team. Start with team, though, because that's the one, you know, that is the first place that investors are going to go. And honestly, for me, in my head, I go around these, and I can't even tell you the order off the top of my head. I'll start with team. And if I don't like the team, bang, I'm out straight away. It doesn't matter what anything else says. And then I'll be like, oh, what's the financial forecast like? Oh, that's good. Exit strategy, they've thought about it. Da, 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 da. If you answer wrong in any of these, then it's usually, you know, it's usually a no. So make sure you've got good answers to everything. But I would urge you to start with team because it's just so important. I told you this one would be quick. So this is my last slide on this one. And then maybe we'll roll through valuation and then just open it up to Q&A. What is my tip? Yeah, I see lots of founders making exactly this mistake, and it's infuriating. So they produce version 1 of their pitch deck. They've got their forecast. You know, they've not really pitched too many times, so it's not slipping off the tongue perfectly. They're not used to the Q&A, so they don't know how to answer that, and it's all a bit clunky. But they go, right, these are the top 10 investors I want to hear. I know they love investing in that space. I know they're da 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 da, and they will go and pitch to those 10 people first. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. You see them get to the, you know, they finish their 10th pitch and they're like, God, I've fallen on my behind every single time. And you know, and they're like, well, maybe I'll go back to those 10 people. It doesn't work. Once I've seen a pitch, I'm not going to watch it again. If I liked it and I'm in. And if I don't, I'm not listening to it again. You get one chance. So whatever you do, don't list absolutely at the start, list your 10 top people. Just don't speak to them yet. Go and test it with, you know, me if you want, or any other, you know, go and find somebody on LinkedIn who'll have a meeting, bounce it past them, and then listen to their feedback, listen to their questions. You don't want to, the fact I'm asking a question means that you didn't answer it in your presentation. And the fact that 2 people asked the question means that it's going to be on everybody's mind. So go through that process of working out what you've missed, where your proposition isn't perfect. Just answer all of that stuff before you then go and hit those 10 people. It's mad. I see so many people do it, and it's, yeah, it's mad.
I was just going to say, I had one of the best founders that ever pitched to me, Simi from UT, who is incredible. Straight after the call, like every question which we asked on the call, she then sent us an email with like responses to all those questions, and then I bet those then formed part of her next deck. But it's just like she's just so on it. It was like we literally had an email within 2 hours saying, great call, you asked these questions, here are the answers. And I just thought, this woman is like insane. She's incredible. I want to invest, you know. So impressive.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's a great tip as well, isn't it? Follow up, be true to your word, all of those good things that make you look professional and on it. I'll tell you what, Emmy, let's go through the next one, and then we can just open to general Q&A. And this is all around valuation. This is the most emotive thing, I guess, for both founders and investors. It's emotive for founders because, you know, this dictates how much of your business you are selling. So, and obviously you want more rather than less, and there are certain controls you lose when you go below certain thresholds. So from a founder point of view, it's really clear why you would want to, you know, have a higher valuation rather than lower. From an investor point of view, there's a couple of lenses here. I guess the most obvious is even the most unsophisticated investor, even somebody who's never invested before, knows that, you know, this is the one thing they can negotiate on, because everybody understands the valuation drives the percentage they will own of your business for a given investment. So even if they don't understand drag, tag, preemption, consents, information rights, they don't understand a word of that. They understand what valuation is. So everybody will have a push at valuation. It's just the way of the world. Yeah, so that's it. Here is a tip for free. Your funding round should in 99.9% of the cases, unless you're a real outlier, it should pass the 15 to 20% test. And what do I mean by that? You should be diluting between 15 and 20% per funding round. There are some very rare exceptions. Let me explain why I've got that bound and what it means. Firstly, this is what market standard looks like, and everybody's expecting it. If you are diluting by more than 20%, then bad things can happen in later funding rounds. I'll give a really brief example from my own portfolio how this happened. So I invested in a business at seed stage. They did a few more funding rounds. They went for their Series A, and the founder had less than 20% himself, which is totally unrelated to the 20% on this slide. The founder had less than 20% himself. So the VC, before they would invest, they forced the company to recapitalize the founder. So they gave the founder another 20% of shares, and then they came in with a Series A. There's a really, really big problem with that. So I, as one of the earlier investors, I get double dilution via that investment round. Firstly, that 20% of shares that the founder gets, who's taking the impact of that? That's me. All existing shareholders own less of the company because this guy owns 20% more. So I took a bath during that recapitalization, as it's called, of the founder. But secondly, the VC came in and diluted me again. So it was a double dilution, which is horrible. Lots of sophisticated investors know that happens, and therefore they don't want to see you as a founder diluted too far. So if you are going to dilute by more than 20% in a funding round, then you should look at tranching your raise. And I've got a slide on what that means in a minute, so I won't dive into that. On the flip side, if you're, I spoke to somebody yesterday, I'm not going to name and shame, that's for sure, but it was something like they were raising £1 million at a 20 million valuation. And, it just doesn't pass this litmus test. So, as an investor, I know either they're raising too much or their valuation's they're raising too little or their valuation's too high. And guess what one I'm going to push at? I'm going to push at their valuation every day. Investors can guess based upon investors can guess how much you're raising or your valuation based upon this number. So make sure it is within a same round. Otherwise, you may find investors just passing by. They'll be like, I'm not even looking at that because the numbers don't look sane. And whatever you do, you don't want that happening. You don't want people walking past before you having the opportunity to pitch. So that's tip number 6, which is, you'll be glad to hear my final tip. What does normal look like? So I'm not talking to you people on this call if you've managed to persist at Series C. This is for people at pre-seed, pre-revenue. So very, very first funding round, that's the blue line. This is from Bowhurst, who are amazing. Hat tip to Henry from Bowhurst, who tracks all of the most important stats within the funding landscape. They know how many rounds are done, what the average valuation, what the average raise, and everything else by sector, by geography, by you name it. I love their quarterly report. I absolutely look forward to. So they do, they publish regularly what is the average valuation and what is the average raise. These figures are a little bit old, actually. They go back a couple of years, but thankfully, after 2021, the market reset anyway. So we're kind of at the levels that they were before. But what we're seeing in the market, and statistics prove this out based upon our platform, the average pre-seed, pre-revenue valuation is 1.5 million. And the average raise is exactly £250,000, which is not a coincidence. That is the new SEIS limit. So people are raising to the SEIS limit because it's a natural barrier with an average dilution of somewhere between 15 and 20%. And those numbers work out, by the way. If you're trying to raise, and there are outliers, one of our customers raised a couple of £1 million last week, pre-seed, pre-revenue from a single investor. That's a massive outlier, but it does happen. So there are exceptions to the rule. If you are not like that founder and you don't have the magic sauce, then your investment round will look like this. So this is what normal looks like. In terms of how I think personally, how I arrive at what I think a fair valuation is, I'm a pre-seed, pre-revenue usually, or kind of, early stage revenue. So I will start with 1.5 million as my benchmark. And then I'll ask a few questions of myself, really, based upon the diagram. I'll be like, great, well, what traction have they got? Have they got an MVP? Have they got beta customers? Have they got paying customers? Are they break even? And based upon the answers to those, the pre-money valuation will be going up. So if they've got any of those things, then that maybe they're up at £2 million if they've got early stage of so add up to 500k to the 1.5 million. Have they got an amazing team, which is obviously the first thing I look at? Have they got a PhD founder with a commercial team alongside him, multiple exits, and. If they've got all those things, well, great, you can add another 500,000 to my mind. Have they got protection in place? So have they got trademarks? Honestly, that doesn't buy you that much. But have they got patents? Have they got, has somebody done a PhD in this topic and they've got all of that, 4 years of studied, distilled into a patent that forms the basis of their business? Brilliant. Well, you can add at least 500,000 for that. And so on and so on. I'm not going to go through all of the points on the kind of how I evaluate a startup, but there's that kind of mental process of, have they got this, have they got that, and that either adds or detracts a certain amount, and when the dust settles, that is the amount that I think is fair. And I'm happy when I'm making an offer to a founder, I explain my rationale, and I'm like, right, you start here, I've added this, and removed this, and this is where my head's at. Yeah, so that's that. I spoke very briefly, this is the last slide, spoke very briefly on tranching your funding round. So again, if I could tell anybody one tip, it's, the one thing I see is, well, we need £1 million to get us through the next 6 years. So we're going to raise £1 million up front against a, £10 million valuation, because that's the only way it looks sane. It's like, well, do not do that. That is entirely the wrong thing to do. What you want to do is split that £1 million into multiple tranches. And you do that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, unless you're an outlier, nobody's putting £1 million into your business if you are at a really early stage. So what you want to do is take on, say, £250,000 at a relatively lower valuation. You spend that money to get to the net, you get to a proof point, or you get traction, you can demonstrate something with that. And then you raise again, maybe £500,000 at the next funding round, and your valuations jump because you've got that proof point or traction. So you could raise more at a higher valuation. And it is just the same way of structuring your funding round. Whatever you do, don't go out there and say, great, I need £1 million for 5 years, so I'm going to raise it all up front. Firstly, investors aren't going to touch it probably. And secondly, you're just going to be diluted to destruction. As in, you'll be diluted more than you would be if you tranched your raise. Emmy, that was a lot of talking. Should we get to some questions?
We most definitely should. I'm just standing up because I had pins and needles in my leg. I wanted to just say that we've got 48, 49, 50 questions coming in. So just for everyone in the chat to be aware of that. I'm sure many of these questions will be relevant to everyone. So let's just get going and see how we get on. I think some of these questions also might have been answered in the in your presentation, so I'll try and pick out ones that haven't. Okay, is an exit strategy essential? That's a good question.
If you're doing your advanced assurance application, forget it. Do not put it on your slides, because it's a red flag to HMRC. So there's tip one. Exit strategy for investors is really interesting, actually, and there's lots of opinions on this. I think I sit somewhere in the middle. So one of the opinions is exit slides are junk. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 5 years. It's ridiculous. Anybody who puts it there or asks for it is a fool. I don't sit in that camp, by the way. The other end of the spectrum is, if there's not an exit slide, I've got to be sure I'm going to get my money out. And I don't agree with that either, because there is no certainty. Angel investment is a punt, right? And there is no guarantee of success, and nobody knows how a startup's going to turn out. The two things that I would do in a pitch deck. So firstly, an angel investor does not want to hear the words that, this might go really well, I'm going to get a CEO in and take £1 million a year salary. Nobody wants to hear that. An angel investor's putting their money in to get their money out. So any hint you have, I should have made this a tip, any hint you are showing that, you're going to turn this into a lifestyle business, any hint at all, investors will just run a mile. That was tip one, and I've forgotten tip two, but it's important.
Nothing.
Secondly, comparable transactions in the market. So if you're if you're making cosmetics or whatever it happens to be, and you can say, great, well, L'Oreal bought this, I'm well off. I've picked a topic I know nothing about, which is unfortunate, but L'Oreal bought this startup for 50 million or whatever. Comparable transactions, people go, oh, it is an acquisitive space, and the valuation on exit is worth, I'm going to get 10 times my money back or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great point. When does diluting include option shares or just investment? So that's a good question. So when you get diluted from a subsequent round, does that dilute the options?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The options are a curiosity of a cap table. I could do an hour on those, but yeah, every investment dilutes everything, including other than non-dilutable shares, in brackets, you should never offer those, but it dilutes everybody pro rata.
Okay. With your tip about diluting 15 to 20% each round, what happens when you have non-dilutive grants and are only diluting 10%?
The grants don't, I mean, non-dilutative grants, as in you're getting free money, they don't hit the cap table. That's great. I mean, it was on my, or if not, it should be, it was on my thought process. I love seeing grants. Firstly, because somebody like Innovate has spent hours looking at your business and they think it's a good business. Secondly, you've got £500,000 in your business and nobody's paying for. You're not giving equity, I'm not paying for. It's brilliant. So grants are a really, really strong, really good thing. But they don't dilute your cap table.
Yeah, because you got the money up front, they're not taking shares. So when you dilute the grants, nothing.
And somebody's validating your idea. It's a win-win-win. Grants are magical.
Hard to get sometimes.
Impossible, but magical.
Yeah. Does that test, which I'm assuming is the 15-20% dilution at each round, unless there's another test that you can think about off the top of your head, Sam, does that apply to company with multiple founders?
Yeah, I mean, the 15 to 20% dilution is irrelevant to the number of founders. It's how much equity is being bought per funding round. Whether you've got 1 or 10 founders, in brackets, don't have 10, but whether you've got 1 or 10 founders, the 15 or 20% dilution is still relevant in that case. There's a whole conversation around the optimal number of founders, in brackets, it's 2 or 3, but and some investors just won't invest. It just won't invest if you've got 1 founder or more than 3. I mean, personally, I'm a bit more flexible, but there's good reasons for the thought process.
There is, but also there is founder fallout, which I've also seen.
Sure.
But I know, like, we've got our own thoughts, haven't we? I don't have a problem with solo founders.
Yeah.
I actually would want to be a solo founder, but that's my personal opinion. Here's what I say if a potential investor asks what my valuation is. So Jenny's saying, this is what she'd say. Is this the right thing to say? We're looking for the lead to set the valuation. I don't want to put myself in a box purely on valuation, as the market determines a value, not a founder. So what are your thoughts on that? Because previously you'd sort of said that as an angel, you like the founder to sort of come up with the valuation.
Yeah, I can understand. There's negotiation 101, right? You want to sit on your hands and let the investor. You want the investor go, oh, value at 5 million. Here's £1 million. No, I can understand the logic of like making the investors decide. I mean, the unfortunate thing is, and this is not exploitative, it's just a fact of the dynamics of the relationship. The investor can say to the founder, well, you can give me a valuation when this conversation's over. And they'll put it in a much more subtle way, but the investor will want the founder to come out with a valuation. There are schools of thoughts on a founder should always wait for a lead, or they should pick what they're happy with and go for. The founder is going to state how much they're raising, at which point, as an investor, I apply that 15 to 20% rule anyway. So you can only hide it so far. If you're raising 250K, I can work out where your valuation is going to be.
It is interesting that Jenny says that, though, because I've been in an investment. I've been in it once or a couple of times in an angel collective I'm part of. They've said, we don't quite know what the valuation is going to be yet. The lead investor is going to do that. I do always find that a bit weird, like when you're investing and you don't actually know what the terms are. As an angel, you sort of don't know where you stand. You're like putting the money in, and someone else is going to make a decision about it.
And what you want to do all the way through the process, another tip I should have added, you're trying to do 2 things. You're trying to make life straightforward for the investor. So, and so no, I don't really know what a valuation is, and that's not helping. They can't make a decision because they don't have all the facts. And secondly, you want to get the investment, and this is where we come to agile investment and things like that. But you want investment sooner rather than later. So and by deferring your valuation, you're not achieving those 2 things. I'm very on the fence. I think, I can argue it both ways. And by the way, when I'm looking to invest in somebody, I get them off the fence quickly because I don't want to waste loads of time doing due diligence to be told our valuation's 10 million quid. Well, great. I'm never going to invest anyway. So I always get founders off the fence to validate that I'm not wasting my time and theirs.
And that's a good point, because everyone's busy. All of our time is precious for everyone.
Yeah.
Another question about grants, but you've already said grants are not taken. Oh, sorry. This is actually a different question. where are grants taken into account with the valuation? So I suppose, like you actually just said, if you see somebody's got a grant, that's a really big, green flag.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of bolsters it bolsters a valuation rather than improves it. If a business, this identical business it has a valuation, if one has a £500,000 grant and the other doesn't, it's probably not going to shift the valuation, if anything at all. But I'm much more likely to invest in that one if it makes sense. I would never take a grant into account for valuation purposes. I just wouldn't.
Okay, brilliant. This is a great question. Would investors consider a team consisting of amazing contractors instead of full-time employees? On that slide, you were like saying the team is everything. I agree with that. We don't talk anywhere near enough about the team and the culture and hiring the right people. What if it's contractors rather than full-time employees?
This is going to be a gross over generalization. Probably not. Probably not is the answer, because investors are looking for skin in the game. They want people that have a meaningful shareholding with vesting. They want people who are going to benefit. The contractor relationship to the startup is just on the wrong foot. I think sometimes you see it where somebody goes to their first round and somebody's already got a day job and they'll be joining when they close the funding round. I think that's fine. I think having a founder who's a contractor is all the wrong. We very, very, very rarely see that. I think it's all the wrong messaging. And you want to position that really as a supplier relationship, because that's what it is.
I think you might be slightly confused. I think what they're saying is, so the business you're going to invest in, their team is like freelancers and contractors.
Yeah.
Into
the business, they're freelancers into the business.
Yeah, exactly. So not the founder itself, but you're saying that's not great, because you want the employees to be part long-term in the company.
Yeah, and that's what I thought I was answering. So the company is at lots of levels, but two that matter for this question. Firstly, you've got the founders, the people on the hook, subject to vesting, skin in the game. They're going to be multi-millionaires if it goes well. They're not if it doesn't. And then you've got the supporting act, which is, employees, NEDs, contractors. For me, you can't be part of the founding team and a contractor. That doesn't work. You can sit in the second rung down, but that's a very different conversation. So don't have a confused team slide with, here's a contractor, on your top table, because that's confused messaging.
And I suppose the clarity that I just got from there and from you on that I hadn't realized is, when you're talking about team, you're talking about the founding team that are going in on that you're talking about in the pitch deck. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've been told now you should raise what gets you to cash flow positive, or at least 18 months. Is that something you're seeing? Is that because I think you said just raise until you're next?
Yeah, I mean, it's horses for courses. The 18 months is absolutely true. You used to be able to raise when raising was easy. You could say, yeah, we're going to raise for 10 months. We'll release the product, and then our valuation will jump and we'll re-raise. The problem is it's really hard to raise at the moment. So people want longer runways, because otherwise you could close a small funding round and then go straight into the next funding round, and you're just distracted as a founder. So there's really strong logic for an 18-month runway. It depends on the business basically to get to break even. It's in lots of cases impossible to get to break even within 2 years. Personally, that's not I do care when they get to break even, but you don't have to do it within my funding round, if that makes sense. You can have another funding round that dilutes me more to get to break even. So that one's a more soft requirement that only a few investors would care about. The 18 months is market practice at the market standard at the moment.
Fantastic. What is your advice if we've raised SEIS, EIS using an advanced subscription model, then converted at a valuation which we now feel is too high, $3.2 million, new investors may object to the high valuation?
You're facing what's called a down round, which is unfortunate, which is really bad optics. That's bad optics for the incoming investors as well, because it doesn't send the right signal. I mean, that's a problem. There's no magic wand there, unfortunately. You raised at a valuation, maybe in a different market, and there's lots of these around where they've done a first funding round 2 years ago maybe, and then the market softened. It's a down round, and the optics aren't great.
So is there anything you can do about that? Or is it just that is how it is? And
I mean, God, this is a real secret. I'm going to get lynched by angel investors here. Lots of angel investors won't notice you're doing a down round. Lots of angel investors, they won't care too much about the existing cap table. They won't walk through, what did you raise at before and what are you raising at now? Your job is to excite them and go, I really want to invest in your business because it's amazing, and gloss over what's happened in the past. Now, I'm not saying lying about it, but you don't have to make it clear this is a down round. Sophisticated investors would be able to work it out, but lots of it, you're selling the future rather than the past. And the market has changed. Any sophisticated angel will realize raising today is very different to 2 or 3 years ago.
I love that. You're selling the future, not the past. That's such a good line. How are you doing with questions, Sam? Because I know you've been mega busy today and you've done already 66 minutes of work and questions. Are you okay to keep
I'm
going?
loving it. Yeah, this is
You're
my
loving
favorite part. I hate presenting. I love the question and answer. So
Okay, perfect. Well, we will continue. If you're looking for funding for something specific, is this approach different? Stop motion animation for children's TV to pitch to networks. We own the IP. We have field experts with buy-in and don't have the money to develop the pilot. So I suppose, yeah, that's interesting. So they're looking for, not really quite sure. Do you understand that question?
I think I do. Yeah, I love it. So you're raising for all the great reasons. You've got a customer lined up. You can't afford to do the development. That's a really lovely, that's a really great place to be fundraising because you've effectively got the customer nailed on. That type of business, you've got to be really careful, but it is still SEIS and EIS compatible potentially. So yeah, I love it. Go for it.
Brilliant. Can you raise the first round as a solo founder without a team?
This goes back to don't worry about impressing everybody. Yes, probably. If you are an amazing founder, if you've got a plan for taking on the team, if you can answer all those questions, and if you find an investor who cares passionately about what you're doing, yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. If you're raising 250 grand, 250K, and the intention is to distribute equity ranging from 15 to 20%, like you said, to a group of investors, could you advise on the methodology for apportioning equity according to each investor's contribution?
Yeah, this is very simple mechanics. So you'll work out how much people are investing. You'll work out how many shares they get for that based upon your valuation divided by number of shares. I've just noticed actually our CTO, Andy Jeffries, shout out to him, is on the call and he can talk you through the Ruby code that does this. But it's really straightforward mechanics to do that calculation. We do it for you. So when you enter on the platform, I'm investing, £10,000 where I want 100 shares. We'll reverse that both ways to the other number. But yeah, the mechanics and maths is straightforward. There's no flexibility. It's a calculation. So yeah, it's really straightforward.
Brilliant. And I was just going to say, we've still got 100 people on the call. I know we have now overrun. We finished this at 2. So this is just us continuing to cover questions. But as Sam posted in the chat, if you have got any questions, you can connect with him. You can book a meeting. And I think Andy is also there fielding questions in the chat as well. Always busy these sessions, aren't they, Sam? We get so many questions, which we love because I learn and you get to show your expertise and we get to help founders, which is the main thing.
Yeah.
How do you get the messaging right as a solo founder? Have their heads so much into everything. Any tips which can help on this? Not the pitch decks, but the messaging conversations to be investable.
Yeah, tell your investors how this won't always be the way. So and play to your strengths. You will, I'm a geek. Everybody who's been on this call for more than 5 minutes realizes that sales and marketing is not my strength. So if I were pitching for investment, I'm not. But if I were, I'd be explaining how I'm going to get a great sales and marketing lead who can do the stuff I'm just no good at. I love working with annual product. I love working the roadmap. I'm not technical either. So but I play to my strengths. So you explain to the founder what your strengths are, what you will do in the future, and how you'll bring other people in to kind of bolster you when you're not quite as strong. Does that make sense, Emmy?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think yeah, it's hard being a solo founder, isn't it? Because at the beginning you are doing everything, but over time you're going to hire for those people who are the experts.
For sure.
So Carl is saying we've gained 3 Innovate UK grants and 1 Horizon 2020. This seems to have little traction with VC funds who only look to sales revenue. We are pre-revenue R&D. Do you know why there is no traction with the grants?
Yes, you are talking to the wrong investor type. VCs are, they only invest in 1% of people. They only invest in businesses that look and feel a certain way. And the two types of businesses that are VC investable that we see, one are ridiculously deep tech. So you've got a PhD in photonics, you've got something brand new, you can revolutionize an industry, you can in principle be a unicorn. Go speak to, there are some really, really great VCs that specialize in that area. They may invest. Or you've got traction. You've got 70k MRR or whatever. If you fall between, if you're not either of those, you're talking to the wrong investor. A, you're not using your superpower. And B, you're just wasting your time talking to an investor type who don't love your type of business. So get to 70k MRR. Don't worry about doing the PhD if you haven't got one. That's time consuming. But get to 70k MRR and then speak to investors. But and I've got an article I've half written that I will share with your community that VCs are seen as, the badge of honor and the first place to go and all of this kind of stuff, which is entirely the wrong thinking to my mind. VCs have a very specific niche around where you need to take investment from and what you need to do with it. There's a really good use case for VC. Otherwise, I think from a founder's point of view, I would not be rushing there at all.
No, I think that's the thing. We are really trying to talk about this at Female Founders Rise, but there's this massive, I don't know what the right word is, but incorrect thinking or sharing of ideas or thoughts that VC is like the way to get funded. And actually, we had this brilliant session with London Business School all about the customer funded business model. Like, how can you get your customers to fund your business to the point that you either don't need investment or you're so much further on, like you said, you're at 70k MRR, or you're so much further on that you can get funding. I think VC is just this thing that everyone hears. So instantly founders think that's what they need. And most businesses aren't VC backable and wouldn't want to take VC investment because there's very sort of strict, not rules are there, but the way you're expected to grow your business is very full on.
Yeah, and realizing the game they play. There's a really, we don't have time for it now. I tell you what, we will book another session, and the first question will be an Ask Me Anything on VCs. There's a company called FanDuel that took on hundreds of millions of pounds, and the founders got booted out of their own business, and they took zero. So the business sold for £500 million. They got nothing. They didn't get a penny. None of the original investors, none of the original VCs. The two most senior VCs took all of the money. Know the game you are playing, and most founders on this group don't even, the game is kind of up here. It's like playing chess with Magnus Carlsen when you could be, it's just, you've got to decide very intentionally, is VC a good fit for you, and are you a good fit for them? And for 99% of businesses, the answer is absolutely not.
Exactly. Well, thank you for sharing that. How do you identify and incentivize your board of advisors?
Incentivizing people is fascinating. We're actually coming out with a new product. Here's an opportunity to punt. We're releasing option schemes, so non-tax advantage or unapproved option schemes, and EMI option schemes, which are meant for employees. That is the right way of doing it, to ensure that you're not just giving shares, you're having vesting shares. So people earn the shares over time. If they don't earn it, you take them back. We're releasing that product in a few months. And we will be by far the most cost-effective way of doing it in the UK, as always.
Amazing.
Options is the way. Options is the way to do it. Don't just give people shares, because if I give you 5% for working with me, don't give 5% either, by the way. But if I give you 5% for working with me over the next 5 years, and I quit the next day, you're going to be upset with that. And without vesting or options, then that's your way of protecting from that scenario.
So essentially using a similar principle to employees with share options for employees.
Yeah, you can. Most advisors can't make use of EMI, which is the most tax efficient option scheme, because they don't meet the criteria. But you can apply the same principles in something called an unapproved option scheme, or a non-tax advantaged tax scheme. It covers the vesting and the taking back if they leave early and all of that kind of stuff. But the tax advantages are much less.
Someone said, what's the best way to get Sam's attention, because he's going to get swamped after this call?
Connect on LinkedIn. I've got a Calendly which I share freely, so get in there quick. All of those kind of things. And I promise we're going to do another session with an Ask Me Anything, and let's do that. Join that as well.
I've probably got time for another four questions, I think. If you're meant to get to 18 months and the typical first raise is only 250K, how can you do a whole 8 months only on 250K? Does that mean you're relying heavily on early profits to cover costs?
Or you're cutting your cloth accordingly. 250 is a really tough one for 18 months. You know, with any kind of spend, that's really, really hard. And sometimes it is impossible to balance, you know, the equation of, right, I'm raising 250 as 18 months. Sometimes for certain businesses, that just doesn't work. That's an aim. And you've got a couple of choices. You either drop the 18 months or you increase the amount you're raising. Now, you can only do that if you can justify being above the 1.5 million. So yeah, it feels like an intractable problem. And for some businesses, it is. You know, it's really, really, really hard to solve. No magic wand. It's very business specific.
Amazing. I'm just going to do something very quickly before we do the last few questions. I just wanted to do a quick poll because we always love to get session feedback. Well, we still got 94 people. So how likely would you be to recommend a session to another founder? The reason I'm asking is we always like to get feedback on the sessions that we run at Female Founders Rise to make sure that we are running, you know, insightful, informative sessions and that people are learning things. So I won't share this with anyone. This isn't going to go anywhere apart from it just gives me a good idea of yeah, exactly how useful you found this. So thank you everyone who has taken the time to fill that in. That's amazing. 60% of people have filled in. So brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's continue. With questions. So I'm just going to close that poll and go back to the questions. And we are at, how do investors feel about seeing a startup using business loan to get going?
Yeah. God, how do I feel about that? I think it shows the founders thinking outside the box. I think it shows, yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's not amazingly positive, but yeah, it's certainly, you know, it's certainly not a bad thing at all.
Good. Okay. What do pitch meetings usually look like? Are they always in person? Is it more conversational, or is it a formal stand-up and pitch or deck format?
A million different formats here. You know, my least favorite is the 1 minute pitch where, you know, a founder stands up and talks for a minute. I hate them. I think it's unfair on founders and unfair on the person listening. I judge lots of those and it's bad. You know, a 5 minute pitch. I went to one last night and there were some really, really strong 5 minute pitches. I think that's optimal. Usually it's you standing up at the front talking and, you know, with slides if you want. Shout out to Gabriel, who was there last night and had no slides and just rocked the room for 5 minutes in a way that only a second-time founder can do. It was it was brilliant. So but yeah, they're all different. One tip I would say is understand the format before you turn up, because if you're expecting just to sit and have a natter and you're in the front of the room, that could be uncomfortable if you haven't prepared yourself for it. Virtually, you know, none are just a nice natter though. Virtually all of them involve you being at the front and being uncomfortable.
I was going to say,
sorry.
No, I was just say something really interesting. So Dan, who does a lot of work with Female Founders Rise, and he's a VC, so it's sort of different.
Yeah.
Like you said, a lot of the businesses are not VC backable, they're not right for VC, but still kind of invested. And he said, you know, from the minute someone walks in the room, he's working out, like you were saying, like, do you like the founder? Are they someone you want to hang out with? So it's the pitch kind of starts before you even walk in the room, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's there from the beginning.
And really important, it kind of continues afterwards, because the investor that spoke to you, bang, they sent you an email. Here's the questions. Here's the answer. You know, this is how to contact me. Shall we grab another call? You know, it shows they're hungry. It shows they're, it shows a lot of things, a lot of positive.
And one other thing I was going to say, before I even had the call with her, I looked at her pitch deck on, you know, something, and she obviously, you had to put your email in. Within 20 minutes, she'd email me and said, Emmy, I want you to invest. I've looked at your background. You're an exit founder. You've done X, Y, and Z. I'd love to have you on my cap table. So I was like, wow, like, who is this woman? She's on it. And then we had a call and then she followed up. So I think, you know, that is just really impressive. And I've looked at loads of people's pitch decks and, you know, they don't even connect with me on LinkedIn. So I think even that, you know, because you put your email in, don't need to look at someone's pitch deck normally.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I had a bit of weird feedback then. how much revenue is minimum to consider good from an MVP? Would say 15K annual revenue be considered good enough?
I mean, you've got to start. So, you know, you're at the start of the revenue journey, but you've got some revenue. That's a big step from having no revenue. So just having some revenue is important. 15K is not going to, you know, that's not going to pay for a lot, but that's not to diminish. You know, you are on the journey. You have something you can sell that people are willing to pay for. You absolutely won't have product market fit at that point. You can't claim that, but yeah, it's a step. It's a material step. It's not earth-shattering, but yeah, it's good.
Amazing. And this is going to be the last question. We've pretty much done them all anyway. I'm ready to launch a social network, which requires a high volume of users. Should I be aiming for high user numbers, or should I aim to generate revenue with less users? Which is this is a proof of concept.
Yeah, the answer is both, probably. I think a few years ago, the answer would have massively leaned towards just get user count. Don't worry about everything else. You can monetize later. You know, I think that has swung towards the middle, which is, you know, actually proving you can monetize is really, really important. It's not growth, you know, it's not user count at any cost anymore. That's for damn sure. So proving that you can monetize from some users is important, but what you don't want to do is clamp your growth by, you know, coming in with too high a fee. So it's a really, and again, some investors will massively care more about user count. Some will care more about you actually having more revenue. And this comes back to, don't try and impress 100% of people there. You got to pick what's important to you as well. But ideally, you want a mixture of them both. Don't swing massively either way.
Amazing. That was so good. Someone said, love this session. I've learned more today than I have in the last month trying to learn elsewhere. So thank you, Sam. You are a fountain of knowledge. Whatever questions we ask, you always have the answer. It's amazing. I did see someone say that they came here at 2 because it was advertised on LinkedIn at 2 o'clock. So if that was the case, I'm sorry. We have got a oh, there you go. Best investor session I've listened to. There you go. Everyone's going to be booking their sessions with you. We will share the recording. We'll create lots of content around this. Stacey, that was you. You got your question answered. So glad we managed to squeeze that in at the end. We have done 2 other really fantastic sessions with Sam. One was on SEIS and EIS, and the other was funding, legals for funding, I think. Is that right? Sam, do you remember what it was?
SEIS and 101 fundraising legals, exactly. Yeah.
Fundraising legals 101. We will send the recordings around to everyone, and they'll be in our weekly newsletter. I'm pretty sure everyone here is on our weekly newsletter, because if you are part of Female Founders Rise, you'll be on that. I think there might be some of your contacts as well, Sam, so we will make sure it gets sent through to everyone. Also joined at 2. Great to hear the questions. Sorry to anyone that joined at 2. That is a mistake about the LinkedIn. I don't know why that happened, but we will send through the recording, which will be brilliant. And yeah, you can watch it in your own time. You can listen to it when you are going for a run or a walk or whatever you like to do. Thanks everyone for all your feedback. It's been so lovely to have you here. I think we had about 150 people live, which is always incredible. It's so lovely to see people turn up, and also Sam. Love doing workshops and masterclasses with you, because it's massively valuable and insightful and actionable, and there's no fluff, and definitely not a sales pitch though, to be honest. If I was a founder, I definitely want to work with Founder Catalyst. So have a brilliant day, everybody, and see you all soon for the next one. Take care.
Lovely to see you, Amy. Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.